what is really scary with that transfer is the freedom of speech, freedom of the press. So that was a big deal when it was transferred in 1997. But then a lot of people were trying to fake this brave face. But editors know better in Hong Kong. So what we do know is that the worst case scenario has actually come true. Some of the most powerful broadcast media in Hong Kong, like TVB, the whole newsroom is now self-censorship. So the editors actually censor themselves. First of all, before the chairman of the Communist Party even start calling their newsroom by saying, that is a story that I don't think the Chinese government would like, so let's just avoid that. And let's just only talk about all the happy stuff. And so as a result, we think that we live in a really happy world, but that is the most disturbing thing to me.
But that's partly why I showed that slide of K-Town. When K-Town came out as an idea, the Korean American community in LA, they really lobbied to have that show shut down. They were like, we cannot allow MTV to portray our community in this way, and they absolutely wanted to censor it. And the reality is, if you have friends that live in K-Town in LA, they actually, that's their party lifestyle. And they're saying, well, that's unfair, because why can't we portray ourselves the way we want to, or the way we choose to, even though it's pretty bad, even though it's pretty nasty. They want to be able to have that freedom.
Yeah, because I hate to constantly use CBC as an example. But during the last federal election, for example, we were actually looking at how news stories were covered and how environment is not a big deal for the Conservative government. And even today, that we were really watching carefully as to how many takes do environmental stories actually get on the air. Is there even interest? And it's scary because a corporation like CBC, portion of the funding comes from the federal government. They're constantly being, under this threat of can we even survive the next day? And it's almost like the life story of CBC forever. That when I was there as a young girl, it was the same thing. Then when I was there as a mother of a 1-year-old, it was the same thing. And I'm sure that Alden can tell you more. But it's crazy. And I think that's how they control the creative minds working for these corporations. And I think that is really sad.
Good question.
I think that's a fantastic point, actually, about the CBC. In fact, I wonder if you would be willing to comment on really recently. It's amazing the field of issues that have, even when the CBC takes up diversity as a set of concerns, whether it has to do with the environment or it has to do with the Occupy movement, there's a way in which they seem to feel under threat, and so are willing to put out positions that don't actually represent or even characterize the large breadth of Canadian popular opinion in the way that they divide the diversity of that popular opinion. And yet it seems they feel an obligation to stretch the envelope of public opinion beyond where people are actually talking, and in ways that are counterproductive. And this has come up recently. I mean, there was an issue this past week, in fact, as the Occupy movement was being covered, and a debate between Linda McQuaig on The Current and a representative from the Tea Party, which was absurd in a certain way, because the position of the Tea Party represents perhaps 5% of the Canadian population, if that. And I wonder if you could talk just about that internal pressure that the CBC feels in terms of its generation after generation.
I was there for, how long were you there?
I was there in the 2 times, so in the late 1980s and also mid 1990s.
Okay. I was there just till last December for 6 years. Smart people are watching what the innovations that CBC are doing, and then it runs out of money. Someone picks up the idea and they run with it. The guys who invented Flickr used to work for CBC Radio 3. Like, this is not an accident. The talent, comes out of CBC. And I think we rank something like 25th or 26th in terms of how much money per capita we're putting towards a public broadcaster. And we expect CBC to be the best in the world, right? And we're 26th in terms of the amount of money. So there's this huge, I had brought up personally with senior executives about what about the idea of creating a public foundation that actually funds the operation of the CBC, at least CBC Radio, so that radio could be separate from all the market influences. And there's in fact been at least 5 different proposals that were never made public about a foundation that would support the CBC, and each time the proposal was shut down. So rather than seeing it as a, you know what, you really should have this much, you're only getting this much, we're going to make a foundation to actually fill in the gap, it was like that foundation would be used as an excuse to like never have to give money again. So we have no idea what to do. To be totally honest with you, I don't think the government knows. Each government kind of plays with the CBC's mind. The employees are constantly feeling like they may be out of a job next year, and that's not, that's not easy. Yeah, I mean, we lose a ton of great talent to other broadcasters around the world because they don't have to deal with that insecurity in their lives. And then there are things I think that they actually don't do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because we know that we want the smartest minds to go out and ask the tough questions for us as the people. So reporters should really be treated like prince and princesses, right, in a way. That at least they should be treated in a way that they don't need to worry about whether they have money for rent or whether they will get a slip anytime soon. And that is just wrong. It really is not helping the kind of atmosphere. But to come back to the question also talked about the coverage on the Occupy Vancouver. And it's actually very interesting because coming from the Chinese community, and we actually talked about it at the foundation, because I also have a colleague who works mainly with the South Asian community. So one day our communications director at the foundation came to us and said that we wanted to help the Occupy Vancouver people. If they asked us to help them with workshops, let's do it. And so he came and asked, so Winnie, do you think you can deliver some youth leaders? And I looked at him and I said, Jim, it's not about me, but it's about what my community will look at this thing. And I think it's so far-fetched now that if I ask them to go to Occupy, and especially it was in the midst of all the drug problems came out, that, I would actually lose that link. So it's a slow cooking kind of relationship, but to go to Occupy is way too soon. But last week, we had this really fabulous young guy called Oliver Harwood, who's part of the Occupy Vancouver movement. He came to us, and he looked nothing like any of the media described as the disheveled, hobo-looking people, crazy, that we like to think that the Occupy Vancouver is all about. Oliver Harwood came to us as I could actually adopt him as my son because he is normal, he's great, he's eloquent, he's sincere. He tells us why they're doing what they're doing. So my question is that why is it that on the mainstream media we don't see more of Oliver, but we only see one face? And in fact, that was enough for me to call in a Chinese radio talk show on Saturday and tell the people that stop complaining, because if any group that should join that movement is you guys. Because you call in every Saturday and Monday to Friday from 5 to 6 to complain about all kinds of Canadian and local policies. There's nothing about Canada that you like. So why don't you go out to join this movement and be part of it? And the things that you don't like about this movement, maybe you can add your share. Then this movement is not only about what you think as the stereotypical faces of the crazy people, but it's also about you, because it's really opening up a forum for you guys to say that I have a right to have an opinion also.
But Winnie, when you say that, say for example, all the Chinese people decided, oh, Winnie's saying this, and yeah, it makes sense, and they go there. Can you see the news on conventional TV after that?
Yeah, so that is the other problem, because it will still be the hobo crazy people.
Exactly.
And we need to fix that.
Right.
We actually had something, I'm not sure if you remember, during the Winter Olympics, there was a bit of a controversy around their lack of diverse representation in the opening ceremonies, right? I was actually the one who wrote the first blog on that. I live blogged it. And a friend of mine at the Georgia Strait, so I live blogged it on Schema Magazine, and Craig Takuchi saw it and said, hey, could we republish this on Georgia Strait? And I said, absolutely. And so he put it up. That was Saturday. By Monday, I was getting hate mail from white supremacist groups from all over the United States and Canada. It hit the Washington Post. It went everywhere. Monday morning, I got a phone call from my boss in Toronto going, "What is going on?" And their first response was cease and desist, take it down, talk to Georgia Strait about getting it totally taken down. And luckily, the public affairs people that were brought into this were like, "Don't you dare! If you do that, we're going to create a whole new controversy around censorship, which we don't want to step into." And I was really disappointed because I was hired to give the CBC direction on where I saw a lack of representation in terms of our programming, and I saw it. I wrote about it, and it wasn't. I had nothing to do with the CBC. But some smart people made the connection that I worked for CBC, and there was a commentary in the National Post that basically said, "Here's another reason why the CBC should be shut down."
That's really
Because they've hired someone who has this sort of opinion, and he literally invited me to go home to Afghanistan. It was one of those. So I was like, wow, So in some ways, I get what they're having to deal with, because when you cross that line, you actually can gather people who want to shut the CBC down, and they'll rally around that. And whereas we don't see Canadians really rally around, making sure, like saying to the CBC, "Well, we will never let you get shut down. We will be here for you," right? That just doesn't really happen until it's going to happen.
That is really amazing.
Yeah.
I went to Rick Love's show to talk about exactly this, and I invited myself because I know Jennifer Chan at the radio, and I was so mad having seen, because it was a big deal for everyone, and for the Chinese, we think on the money side also that as a taxpayer we paid a lot, so like everybody else. So we have a share in this Canadian event, especially in BC. So I was the whole family was sitting there that evening to watch the opening ceremony, looking for our story, our face. But then we saw nothing. It was such a fabulous show and I thought, and then I said to my son, who was a young teenager back then, at least we could have, because I remember distinctly that there was this prairies. It was actually translated in the opening. And I thought, if they actually wanted to do it, they could actually have this railway and have some workers working on it. And that I would be happy, just maybe like a glimpse, that to recognize that we also helped in building Canada is all part of it. And so it's all tokenism, and I was so mad and steaming. So I sent an email to Jennifer Chan at CBC Radio and just ranted to her about how angry I was.
Sent it to me too.
Oh, great. So eventually, they did put me on Rick Love's show, but then the thing is, I went on the 6:30 time slot. So who would be listening? But I thought, well, if I could actually share my take, it's actually better than nothing. So I woke up early, went down there, 6:30 I did the talk, and I think Rick actually refused to talk to me after. I think he only did this because it was in the program. You can physically saw his body language that he completely did not endorse what I was saying. I don't need you to agree with me, ask me good questions so that I can explain why I was angry. So I talked about this, but then I also subsequently, not hate mails, but then people were telling me that, what you said this morning is so un-Canadian. It's almost like this Canadian nationalism thing was drowning all of us, that we were not thinking straight. That it's all about Canadian nationalism. That Canada has to look good, and for you to even poke a hole in this beautiful picture, you're guilty and